Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we'll be reading and discussing Kūkai's Benkenmitsunikyōron, or the difference between the esoteric and exoteric teachings, in its entirety. This reading and discussion is quite short, and it is meant as a supplement to episode 90, What is the difference between exoteric and esoteric teachings? For that reason, it will be just me reading and discussing today. This text does exactly what the title says. It explains, from Kūkai's point of view, the differences between the exoteric, or revealed, teachings, and the esoteric, or hidden teachings, of the Buddha. He discusses how we ought to understand the characteristics, the functions, and the nature of both, and, in so doing, he creates an interpretive framework for the entire body of the Buddha's teachings. This version comes to us from translator Hakeda Yoshito. We hope you enjoy. There are three bodies of the Buddha and two forms of Buddhist doctrine. The doctrine revealed by the Nirmanakaya Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, is called exoteric. It is apparent, simplified, and adapted to the needs of the time and to the capacity of the listeners. The doctrine expounded by the Dharmakaya Buddha, Vajrayāna, is called esoteric. It is secret and profound and contains the final truth. The sutras used in exoteric Buddhism number in the millions. The collection is divided by some into 10 and by others into 51 parts. They speak of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 vehicles. In discussing practices, they believe that the 6 paramitas are the most important and explain that in order to attain enlightenment, a period of 3 eons is needed. The great sage has explained these matters clearly. According to the esoteric Vajrayāna Sutra, the Buddha, manifested in human form, preached the doctrines of the 3 vehicles for the sake of bodhisattvas who were yet to advance to the 10 stages of bodhisattvahood, for the followers of Hinayana, and for ordinary people. The Sambhogakaya Buddha taught the doctrine of 1 vehicle for the bodhisattvas in the 10 stages of bodhisattvahood. Both of these teachings are exoteric. The Dharmakaya Buddha, for his own enjoyment, with his own retinue, preached the doctrine of the 3 mysteries. This is esoteric. This doctrine of the 3 mysteries is concerned with the innermost spiritual experience of the Dharmakaya Buddha, and the bodhisattvas in the 10 stages of bodhisattvahood, or even those who are nearly equal to the Buddha, cannot penetrate it, much less the Hinayanists and ordinary people, who cannot cross its threshold. It is thus said in the Shirti Ching Lun and in the Shur Mo Ho Yen Lun that his experience is beyond their capacity. Also, the Chung Weisher Lun and the Madhyamaka Karikas deplore that it transcends words and thought determinations. Its transcendence is spoken of, however, from the viewpoint of those who have not yet been enlightened, and not from the viewpoint of the enlightened ones. I shall give clear evidence for this in the following pages on the basis of sutras and commentaries. It is hoped that those who aspire to attain enlightenment will understand their meaning clearly. Being entangled in the net of exoteric Buddhism, people wear themselves out like male goats dashing themselves against fences. Being blocked by the barriers of the Mahāyāna teachings of provisional nature, they give up advancing further. They are exactly like those who, wishing to rest there, believe in an illusory city, or like children who take a yellow willow leaf to be gold. How can they hope to preserve the glorious treasures which lie within themselves, numberless as the sands of the Ganges? It is as if they were to discard ghee and look for milk, or to throw away precious pearls and pick up fish eyes. They are cut off from their Buddha seed. They are victims of a mortal disease, before which even the king of medicine would fold his hands in despair, a disease for which even a rain of nectar would be of no avail. If men and women once grasp the fragrance of this esoteric Buddhism, they will have in their minds a clear understanding, as things are reflected in the magic mirror of the Emperor of Qin, and the differences between the provisional and the real doctrines will naturally be resolved. Evidence to this effect is abundant in the sutras and commentaries, and I will reveal part of it in the hope of assisting beginners. Question. The transmitters of the Dharma in ancient times composed extensive discourses advocating the 6 schools and expounded the Tripitaka so abundantly that the texts could not be stored even in a large library, and people grew tired of opening them. Why then do you bother to write this book? What is it worth? Answer. There is much to be expressed. Therefore, it should be written. Everything transmitted by former masters is exoteric Buddhist teachings. Here I am concerned with the esoteric Buddhist teaching, about which people have not had an adequate understanding. I should like to compile, therefore, a handy guidebook for your reflection, quoting pertinent passages from sutras and commentaries. Question: what are the differences between the exoteric Buddhist teachings and the esoteric Buddhist teaching? Answer: the teachings expounded by the Nirmanakaya Buddha in order to help others responding to the needs of the time are called exoteric. What was expounded by the Dharmakaya Buddha for his own enjoyment on his innermost spiritual experience is called esoteric. Question: the fact that the Nirmanakaya Buddha preached is agreed upon by all schools. As to the Dharmakaya Buddha, however, we understand that he is formless and imageless, that he is totally beyond verbalization and conceptualization, and that therefore there is no way of explaining him or showing him. Sutras and commentaries describe him in this way. Why do you now assert that the Dharmakaya Buddha preaches? What is your evidence for this? Answer: now and again the sutras and commentaries refer to this preaching. Misled by their biased preconceptions, people overlook these pertinent passages. Indeed, their meanings will be revealed only in accordance with the capacity of the reader. The same water may be seen as emerald by heavenly beings and as burning fire by hungry ghosts. The same darkness may be seen as light by nocturnal birds and as darkness by men. Question: if what you have said is really true and is given in the teachings of the Buddha, why have the former transmitters of the Dharma not discussed it? Answer: the sermons of the Tathagata were delivered in accordance with the particular diseases in the minds of his audience. Manifold remedies were provided, depending on their varied capacities. The sermons, thus adapted to the capacity of his listeners, were in many cases provisional and seldom final. When the Bodhisattvas composed the commentaries, they wrote faithfully on the basis of the sutras, which were provisional in nature. It is therefore said in the commentary on the Dasabhumika Sutra written by Vasubandhu that, quote, only the way to enlightenment can be talked about, and not the enlightenment itself, unquote. And also in the commentary on the Awakening of Faith written by Nagarjuna that, quote, the perfect sea of enlightenment cannot be talked about, unquote. These works were based on the provisional sutras and were not intended to advocate the final truth. The masters of the Dharma who transmitted the exoteric Buddhist teachings interpreted the passages of profound significance appearing in the exoteric Buddhist texts in the light of their shallow doctrines and failed to find any esoteric import in them. Faithfully transmitting the exoteric Buddhist teachings from master to disciple, they discussed Buddhism according to the tenets of their particular schools. They so eagerly supported their beliefs that they found no time to meditate on those passages which might have been disadvantageous to their doctrines. In the meantime, Buddhism had spread eastward in China and gradually gained a significant role there. The Buddhist texts translated from the time of Emperor Ming of the later Han Dynasty to that of Empress Wu of the Tang Dynasty were all exoteric. During the reigns of Emperors Xianzong and Taizong, when Masters Vajrabodhi and Pukeng were active, the esoteric Buddhist teaching flourished and its profound meaning was discussed enthusiastically. The new medicine had not long been in use, and the old disease was not yet cured. The Chinese masters of exoteric Buddhism, even when they came across passages of esoteric significance, such as the statement in the Lankavatara Sutra that, quote, the Dharmakaya Buddha preaches, unquote, or in the Dachur Tu Lun that, quote, the Dharmakaya Buddha is endowed with an exquisite form, unquote, interpreted them according to their imagination or were governed by the professed doctrines of their schools. It was indeed a pity that these wise masters of ancient times failed to appreciate the taste of ghee, the final truth. Question: if this is the case, in which sutras and commentaries are the differences between the exoteric and the esoteric Buddhist teachings given? To this question, Kukai gives the titles of 6 sutras and 3 commentaries, and then passages from these and other texts with short remarks of his own at the end of a quotation or a group of quotations. These quotations occupy the major part of the work. In the last section, he remarks, the foregoing quotations from sutras and commentaries prove that differences exist between exoteric and esoteric Buddhism, and that the latter was preached by the Dharmakaya Buddha himself. It is hoped that learned readers will deliberate on them and remove their misconceptions. Question: according to your assertion, what the Dharmakaya Buddha preached on his innermost spiritual experience is esoteric, and all other Buddhist teachings are exoteric. Then why is the word esoteric applied to some sutras preached by the Shakyamuni Buddha, the Nirmanakaya Buddha? We also wonder in which group we should include the Dharani teachings imparted by that Buddha. Answer. The meanings of exoteric and esoteric are manifold. If the more profound is compared with the less profound, the former is to be called esoteric and the latter exoteric. This is the reason why we often find the term esoteric introduced in non-Buddhist scriptures as well. Among the teachings given by the Tathagata, various distinctions between exoteric and esoteric have been made. The Hinayana doctrines explained by the Buddha can be called esoteric when compared to the doctrines given by non-Buddhist teachers. In the same way, when the Mahāyāna doctrines are compared with the Hinayana doctrines, the former are esoteric and the latter exoteric. Even in the Mahāyāna itself, the teaching of the one vehicle is esoteric in contrast to the teachings of the three vehicles. In order to distinguish the Dharani section from other lengthy discourses, we call it esoteric. The teaching given by the Dharmakaya Buddha is the most profound, while the teachings of the Nirmanakaya Buddha are apparent and simplified. Hence, the former is called esoteric. The term esoteric is also used in the senses of to conceal, or something that is hidden, that is, sentient beings conceal, and hidden by the Tathagata. Since sentient beings conceal their original nature, that is, true enlightenment, they conceal themselves through illusions derived from ignorance. The doctrine revealed by the Nirmanakaya Buddha is adapted to the needs of the time and is, as it were, an effective medicine to cure the diseases of the mind. Thus, the Buddha who preaches for the benefit of others keeps his innermost spiritual experience hidden and does not reveal it in his instructions. It is hidden even from those bodhisattvas who are nearly equal to the Buddha. It transcends the range of understanding of those who are in the 10 stages of bodhisattvahood. This is the so-called experience hidden by the Tathagata. In this way, the meanings of the term esoteric are many, but the term in its proper sense should be applied only to the secret teaching revealing the innermost experience of the ultimate Dharmakaya Buddha. The Dharani section preached by the Nirmanakaya is also called esoteric, but when it is compared to the teaching of the Dharmakaya Buddha, it is not final. Among the teachings called esoteric, there are the provisional and the final. They should be classified properly according to the context. Thus concludes the Benkenmitsunikyōron, or the difference between the esoteric and exoteric teachings. The first point that I would like to discuss regarding this text is its title, the Benkenmitsunikyōron. Ben simply refers to the difference between something, or how it ought to be divided or understood hierarchically. Ken, or Kenkyō, refers to the exoteric or the revealed teachings. The entire body of sutras recorded by Ananda, spoken by the Buddha, and transmitted through all of the centuries that Buddhism has existed are regarded by Kūkai, as he says, as the exoteric, the revealed teaching, or Kenkyō. Mitsu means secret, or concealed, or hidden, or esoteric. Everything that is revealed by the Dharmakaya Buddha, by Vajrayāna, called in Japanese Dainichi Nyōdai, that is regarded as being Mikkyo, as being the secret teaching. Nikkyo simply means two teachings. There's the one teaching, the revealed, and the other, which is esoteric or hidden. And then Ron is simply treatise or argument. So, Kūkai begins his treatise by discussing the three bodies of the Buddha and the two forms of Buddhist doctrine. The three bodies of the Buddha are the three that we've talked about before in the context of the Trikaya. They are the Nirmanakaya Buddha, which is the historical, physical Buddha, that was Shakyamuni. And then we also have the Sambhogakaya. This is the Buddha that appears in the sutras, or it's the Buddha that appears whenever you visualize a Buddha in your mind. And then we have the Dharmakaya Buddha, which in this case is Vajrayāna or Dainichi Nyōdai. Who the Dharmakaya Buddha actually is depends on what sect or which school you're talking to. So for Pure Land Buddhists, the Dharmakaya Buddha is Amida in his purest form. For Shingon Buddhists, it's Dainichi Nyōdai or Vajrayāna. For Zen Buddhists, it's Shakyamuni himself. The understanding comes from the Lotus Sutra that all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we see are manifestations of this Dharmakaya Buddha, or they are in some way an instantiation of that Buddha. Then, of course, we have the two forms of Buddhist doctrine, esoteric and exoteric. Kūkai describes the exoteric as apparent and simplified, and adapted to the needs of the time and the capacity of the listeners. In this way, he's arguing, one, that for it to be explained and put into language means that it has to be simplified and has to be apparent and has to be adapted to the needs and the capacities of the listeners. The listeners were not ready for a mind-to-mind transmission of the Dharma, which is a concept we've talked about before on the show. They needed to be told. They needed to be instructed. They needed to be explained what the Dharma is and what it means. Now, even though Kukai and esoteric Buddhism in general regards the esoteric teaching as the superior and the more profound and subtle teaching, it doesn't discount the value and the function of the exoteric teaching. It's said that the Buddha teaches with delightful speech. He uses metaphor and simile and parable, and he uses words very effectively and very skillfully in a way that encourages people to follow the Dharma and in a way that causes people to feel joy whenever they hear it. That is a very important and necessary function of preaching and of sermons and of public speaking, and it's regarded as such by Shingon Buddhists. They don't entirely discount the value or the subtlety or the profundity of the exoteric teaching. They simply regard it as being provisional, as being a step on the way to the esoteric teachings. The esoteric teachings, as Kukai says, have the characteristics of being secret and profound and by containing the final truth, the ultimate Dharma. As we will see, although Kukai says that the esoteric teaching is referred to in a few different places in the canon, and it's sort of hinted at, it's never really actually borne out in its entirety. The only texts where we get actual explanation of the esoteric teachings will be from the Shingon or the esoteric canon, which are going to contain texts like the Vajrayāna Sutra, which we've read and discussed, or the Vajrayāna Abhisambodhi Tantra, or the Vajrayāna Abhisambodhi Sutra, which we will read and discuss soon. Kukai then explains how the body of sutras, the exoteric teachings, are divided by many different people. They're divided into 10 or into 51 parts. This is just how they group together the sutras, either based on length or based on content or based on phase in the Buddha's life or phase in the explanation of the Dharma when the Buddha teaches it. And they also speak of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 vehicles. The one vehicle is the Ekayana, the Buddha vehicle that comes from the Lotus Sutra. The 2 vehicles are of voice hearers and Pratyeka Buddhas, or you could even say the Mahāyāna and the Hinayana. And then the 3 vehicles are going to be the Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas. The 4 vehicles are going to be Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas. And then the 5 vehicles are going to be the previous 4 plus ordinary people. He also talks about how the Mahāyāna describes the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections, as the most important practices and the most important ways and the most effective ways to achieve enlightenment. But even still, with practicing that, with reading and following the exoteric teachings, it is said that 3 eons, or 3 Mahakalpas, are needed in order to reach enlightenment. This is not discussed directly here, but in other texts written by Kukai, it's described that whoever understands the esoteric teachings is immediately going to transform into a Buddha, is immediately going to enter into the mandala, and is immediately going to have final enlightenment. So the esoteric teachings are regarded sort of like a rocket ship that takes you immediately to either Dainichi Nyorai's Pure Land, which is called Mitsugon, or Secret Garden, or it's going to at least turn you into a Buddha immediately. It's described as being like a Vajra bolt, or a lightning bolt. We've seen the metaphor of the Vajra bolt, or the lightning bolt, in the Diamond Sutra and in other texts where the Vajra is a common image. Next in the text, Kukai describes how, according to the Vajrayāna Sutra, which we've read and discussed, that Mahāvajrayāna, or Dainichi Nyorai, describes how the Trikaya are essentially a skillful means. He tells a story of how he manifested himself in human form, in his Nirmanakaya form, as Shakyamuni Buddha, and preached the doctrines of the 3 vehicles for the sake of bodhisattvas, who were yet to advance to the 10 stages of bodhisattvahood, and for the Hinayanists, and for ordinary people. And then he describes how he manifested himself in the Sambhogakaya form, and taught the doctrine of the one vehicle in the Lotus Sutra for the bodhisattvas of the 10 stages, and then how both of these teachings are exoteric. The Dharmakaya Buddha and his teaching is explained in the Vajrayāna Sutra and in the Vairocana Abhisambodhi Sutra and in Tantric texts and elsewhere. And he describes how in this sutra, the Dharmakaya Buddha, Mahāyāna, discusses how he preached the doctrine of the three mysteries, body, speech, and mind. Or in a more practical way of describing it, mandala, mudra, and mantra. According to Kūkai and according to the Vajrayāna Sutra, the three mysteries teaching is esoteric. The reason why it is esoteric is, one, it's not revealed in any of the other sutras. So in any of the sutras given by Shakyamuni Buddha, we don't ever see a description of mantra, mudra, and mandala, especially not paired in such a way to invoke a rocket ship doctrine, which immediately transforms a person into a Buddha. We also never see how these three mysteries are described as being the innermost spiritual experience of the Dharmakaya Buddha. In some Zen texts, we have descriptions of this experience of what's sometimes called innermost noble self-realization, or basically an experience of enlightenment that comes from an enlightened mind realizing itself. But we never have this doctrine that's preached to reveal one's innermost spiritual experience, and we don't have it preached in the form of the three mysteries. Next, Kūkai makes several references to different texts, which are commentaries and are treatises that are authored after the sutras are recorded and given and transmitted. These are the Madhyamaka Karikas, the Shirteaching Lun, and the Shirmoho Yen Lun, and other texts that describe how to understand and how to apply and practice and interpret the Mahāyāna teachings. Next, he makes a reference to how people can get tangled up in exoteric Buddhism and end up spinning their wheels and never actually attaining enlightenment or Buddhahood. He says, quote, "Being entangled in the net of exoteric Buddhism, people wear themselves out like male goats, dashing themselves against fences," unquote. This is a very serious way to sort of accuse Mahāyāna people and Theravada people of really banging their heads against the wall in a literal way. It's really critical of how these practices are, in Kūkai's mind, a dead end. And it's not really going to ever be final. It's not ever going to be concrete. It's not ever going to get you anywhere, because all of these teachings are, as he describes them, of a provisional nature. One of the reasons that he describes that they are of a provisional nature is because there are changes in the Buddha's Dharma as he preaches throughout his life. There are many different ways to sort of resolve the contradictions that come up in the sermons, and sometimes the sermons themselves attempt to resolve these contradictions. Oftentimes, we see Shariputra advocating for earlier teachings and trying to get the Buddha to explain why, when you preached one thing in the past, are you now preaching something else that doesn't quite match up with what you said before. And oftentimes there's lengthy explanations, or there's a situation where the Buddha will say, well, nobody really could understand it back then, so I preached a simplified, provisionally true sort of doctrine, and now I'm preaching the one that's finally true. Now I'm giving you the actual teaching that I meant to give you, but you were not advanced enough to have before. We have often described that on this show as Mahāyāna Theravada sniping. So it's Mahāyāna people trying to justify and establish their superiority and their higher spiritual advancement over the Theravada people. In this case, however, Kūkai is interpreting those contradictions and those resolutions as being evidence of the Buddha building up to the very highest level teaching that he could possibly get to, but he never actually was able to preach it, because as soon as the teaching is preached, as soon as it's spoken, it becomes exoteric, it becomes revealed, manifest, it becomes apparent. And so he was doing his very best to get people to the very final stage before they had to take the final leap of faith themselves and come to understand the esoteric or the hidden teaching. So what we have called interdenominational sniping on the show, to Kūkai's mind, is not actually sectarian sniping. It's actually him trying to build on what he has said before and slowly reveal more and more subtle and profound teachings until he can't reveal anymore. Kūkai makes a reference to a chapter in the Lotus Sutra called the Illusory City, where people think that they have attained enlightenment, they think that they've made it, they think that they understand the teaching, but it's actually a phantom city or an illusory city, and people there are like children who take a yellow willow leaf to be gold. And the Buddha uses that as a skillful means in order to encourage people to keep practicing, but it's not a place where you can stay. It's not a place where you actually reach any final or fundamental enlightenment or advancement. You have to go beyond that illusory city. You can't mistake the yellow willow leaf to be gold. In Buddhism, there's tons of metaphors and images that are presented to represent when you think you've got it, but you don't really got it. There's the yellow willow leaf, which you mistake to be gold. There's the illusory city. There's the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself. There's the picture of a rice cake. There's all sorts of these sorts of images that are supposed to indicate that there is the way that we refer to the thing, there's the way that we present the thing, and then on the other side, there's the thing itself, which transcends language and which transcends even conceptualization in terms of words and speech. Next, Kukai makes a reference to the idea of the magic mirror of the Emperor of Qin, and this is referring to bronze mirrors that were often used or made in China going back as far as the 5th century BC, and they are meant to be used ritualistically, and they're meant to be used as a way to understand a metaphor for enlightenment and for the mind that reflects the universe exactly as it is. The next section of the text begins the question-answer portion, where Kukai feeds these questions that he anticipates that people are going to have about his argument to a fictional, made-up interlocutor. And he discusses these issues such as, why haven't you ever said this before? There's so many sutras. Why are you now writing something else? You say that this esoteric teaching exists. Where can I find it? Questions like that. And Kukai gives answers, gives quotations from sutras and commentaries to support them, makes references to sutras and commentaries. And unfortunately, some of those quotes and some of those analyses are not included in these translations. Unfortunately, whenever I said that here Kukai mentions the titles of 6 sutras and 3 commentaries and gives his own explanation of them, that wasn't me giving a paraphrase of what the text is doing. That's actually written in this translation. And so at this time, I don't have access to the quotes of the sutras and what Kukai said about them. So I just have to believe that Kukai was convincing whenever he quoted these sutras and gave his analysis of them. One of the things that Kukai mentions is that now and again the sutras and commentaries hint at the existence of this esoteric teaching. They refer to its existence, even if they don't give or explain what is actually being taught or preached. And this is very fascinating. We are supposed to believe that Kukai is seeing these clues. He's reading between the lines. He's finding hints all along the way in the body of sutras, in which he is extraordinarily well read. And from these pieces, he's putting together a picture of this hidden teaching that is not revealed to everyday people. It's only there for people who have a capacity to find it out and to see it and to seek it out through the practice of the 3 mysteries, mantra, mudra, and mandala. One thing that's very interesting is that whenever he is asked, why has nobody else taught this before? Kukai answers that people did refer to it and they came across the hints that he has come across, but they were so locked up in their own doctrines and their own sectarian concerns that they didn't meditate on passages which, quote, might have been disadvantageous to their doctrines, unquote. In that way, he's sort of saying that previous teachers, previous thinkers have been entirely too selfishly concerned with the doctrines and the mandates of their sects and their schools. And so they have sort of willfully ignored what he believes are very obvious and apparent hints at an esoteric doctrine. This is very critical of all other schools of Buddhism, and it's very critical of all previous teachers of Buddhism. And he thinks that only his lineage, only his teacher, Huiguo, and the lineage that goes all the way to Nagarjuna and to Vajrabodhi and to Mahāyāna is the lineage where this secret esoteric teaching is preserved. An interesting question that hangs in the background of this entire text and in the background of this entire argument of the difference between esoteric and exoteric Buddhism and the superiority of esoteric over exoteric is, why is there a hidden teaching? Why does the Buddha, the Dharmakaya Buddha, Mahāyāna, withhold something that could, in theory, turn everyone into a Buddha immediately? This question comes up a lot in the discussion of esoteric Buddhism, but it's kind of a wrong question. And the reason why is because the Buddha is not withholding this information willingly. He doesn't know something that we don't. He doesn't have something that he can give us that will lead us all to immediate Buddhahood, immediate enlightenment, and he's just choosing not to. Rather, it's something that cannot be explained, and we don't have the capacity to understand something that cannot be explained. In other words, as soon as he reveals the teaching, as soon as he instructs us on it, it becomes exoteric. It loses so much of its profundity and depth that it becomes an entirely different doctrine, an entirely different teaching altogether. So he's not willfully withholding it. It's just simply the way that it works, that as soon as you try to talk about it, as soon as you try to interpret it, as soon as you try to break it down categorically and calculatively and linguistically, it becomes something different. Speaking to the issue of the capacity of the listeners, additionally, the teaching isn't being withheld from us, in as much as we are also concealing our own capacity for understanding it. Kūkai says, sentient beings conceal their original nature, that is, true enlightenment. They conceal themselves through illusions derived from ignorance. In that way, the onus is sort of put on us, in the sense that we have the capacity. We can understand the profundity and the depth of the esoteric teaching, but we conceal ourselves from it. We hide ourselves from it because we get too locked up in language and speech, because we get too locked up in our desires and our illusions that are all derived from our ignorance. This is kind of a very succinct way to say that we have the choice and the ability to uproot our ignorance and to uproot our illusions and to uproot our desires, and oftentimes we don't. But if we did, then we would be able to access the secret hidden teachings that are given by the Tathagata about his innermost spiritual experience. This is sort of intuitive. I can't give you the what it is like to be Nick, or to be a human being if you're not a human being. Similarly, we can't access the what it is like of being a cat, or of being another animal, or of being a god. We can only imagine ourselves being that thing, because we only have access to our own phenomenological experience, our own immediate what it is like. So the Buddha can't give us the what it is like of being the Buddha, especially of being the Dharmakaya Buddha, without us doing a lot of work to free ourselves from our attachment to and our connection to the what it is like of being human beings, of being ordinary people, or of being Pratyeka Buddhas or Bodhisattvas or Arhats or whatever. Other species and gods and other types of beings are not all withholding the what it is like from us. It's just something that, because of our situation, we can't access. That's why the teaching is never explicitly, apparently revealed and explained. I hope you've enjoyed this week's discussion on the Benkenmitsunikyōron, or the difference between the esoteric and exoteric teachings, written by Kūkai. We will definitely be reading and discussing more Kūkai on the show in the future, but for now we're going to return to our regular listener-submitted questions, and we're also going to go back to the Lotus Sutra for Chapter 2 on skillful means. I hope to see you there. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.